What's up, everybody? We are live here. My name is Charlie Bathgate. Most of you probably know my ugly mug at this point, and I'm joined by one of our favorite guests here at Steam Room Trading, Chris Cady. Chris, can you say
Hey,
what's up to everybody?
hey, everybody, what's up? It's a pleasure to be back, and I guess we're going to try and say some words about the nostalgia and what we've been through. So stick around. It
Yeah,
should be interesting today for everybody who's watching it at a later date. It's June 10th. It was a particularly nasty day in the market. So if we're short, if we're not so quick to smile, that may be the reason why. It was just a Charlie. It was just a stop hunt all day on no volume, and for
the
people.
guys, I mean, if you guys don't know Chris, then go into our YouTube channel, look at some interviews with Chris. He's taken on legendary status in our community, not to mention many of the sort of New York trading communities for good reason. Uh, he is a legend. He has been what 40 over 40 years in the game, right, Chris? And you guys might be saying 40 years, he doesn't look that old. Well, that's what happens when you start trading when you're 19.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
were the youngest member.
On the floor and on any floor, because
Mm-hmm.
in New York, the drinking age was 18 at the time, and that was of legal age. But every other
Yes.
right, but every other state was 21. It was
Yeah.
just a freak of nature that I happened to be. It wasn't my decision. It was my boss, Walter Frank. He was chairman of New York Stock Exchange, and I got him tickets to see the Grateful Dead at Radio City. And he was like, he went, and then he was like, it's about time we made you a member. And I
I
was like,
love it.
isn't that great? True
That's how the
story.
game is played. That's how
Yeah.
especially back then, that's how it was played. Yeah, I won't go on about Chris's biography and CV, but I can tell you it's very impressive and prestigious. He's learned and traded alongside some of the biggest names, in the world, in the game.
Mhm.
And he has an incredible resume, in his own right. And so most of the time, Chris, when we bring you on, we talk a lot about trading psychology, right?
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably delve in a good bit that today. And I wanted to kind of center this conversation around this thing that we created, which we call the trader's journey, right? And I haven't really talked to you that much about this, so I'm kind of putting Chris on the spot here, guys, to just like give an off the cuff reaction. But Chris has, he's people who take the master course within, our community. They get access to Chris's insights on trading psychology. Same thing with the dedicated psychology course that we have. That is led by Chris, and the but like we keep, a lot of that's behind closed doors. We haven't had you on, Chris, in a while to really like talk about this stuff in the public, and especially not since we put this out here. We had a lot of people telling us like, "Yo, get Chris Cady on here to talk about his opinion of this thing," right? Because you've seen, hundreds of traders, thousands in your own
Thousands.
personal life, right?
Yeah.
Go through their own journeys.
Yeah.
And then, in your work with us and your work with other businesses, you've seen, a host of thousands of other traders. So I'm kind of curious, like, does this look at all like what your experience was like? I mean, is yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it resonates with a lot of folks because, as everybody knows, it's the hardest thing. It's the hardest job, right? 8 out of 10 people lose everything. And Pete Stottlemyre used to say, "Look, you want to be in a career where everybody loses because the upside's unlimited if you can make it."
Mm,
And he would always say, like, "Look, a dry cleaner knows what it makes. A restaurant pretty much knows what it's making. Even an insurance company knows what it's making, and the margins are the margins." But here in trading, it was the last, in his words, it was the last unsolved career path. Now, of course, there's many more, but
mm,
I do think that it draws it draws in the idea that every day you can win the lottery. You can wake up one day and win the lottery. And Victor Sprandio, Trader Vic, used to say some days they hand out $1,000 bills. And
mm-hmm,
so, and then certainly many medical professionals or even mental health professionals like yourself would probably say that every day is the beginning is a new day, right? And here in trading, it is essentially a new day every day. So that there's a death and rebirth aspect that maybe the Buddhist would find attractive, or
mm,
or any religious person would find, this, hey, I have a new shot today. I'm reborn again. You can every day is a new day. And so
Every day, you've talked about that in terms of our psychology, the psychology course. Like every day you wake up, no matter what happened the day before, market closes, it's sort of a death, right? You wake up,
yep,
rebirth, you get a new
yep,
shot at life, the new
yep,
shot in the market. Yeah.
yep.
And that's a very empowering perspective to embrace. If you
Right.
can connect to that.
Yeah. I mean, and certainly I've heard it so many times from traders about how the market has no memory. Like today's action is different than the prior days, and tomorrow's will be different than today's.
Mm.
And so, and then remember, we would talk about if you walk in and you just don't know, you're kind of an artist, and you're either going to get the charcoal, the chisel, the painting. You have to create art with whatever they hand you.
You have to
And
have the tools to be an artist in different environments.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
maybe the beginning of this trader's journey aspect is figuring out that it's a puzzle that we need to solve every day, and then you're like, okay, well, I remember for years it was like, fuck, pardon my language, it was
You can cause as much as you want.
it was it was like you were facing a confusing situation, and the anxiety of that was just brutal. Like people would chew their nails, smoke a lot of cigarettes, things of
Mm-hmm.
that nature. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think in the beginning of the journey, you're learning about both your own character traits and dealing with the confusion of the unknown future, and then
Mm-hmm.
working around. There's either it must be some sort of coping mechanism, or you're solving the puzzle, right? Because there's no answer per se. You have to you get glimpses of the unknown order of the market, but yeah, so to your point, right, the trader's journey is a fairly accurate thing. And you can see that there's an upward slope towards the end, and that's essentially your money flow becoming
Mm-hmm.
more consistent, or how should we say, you're cutting your losses quicker and allowing the winners to stack up,
Mm-hmm.
something of
Yeah,
that
we did that.
nature.
Yeah, we did that on purpose. As you get sort of further up here and to the right, you have fewer sort of larger drops down, right? As
Right.
more you learn to kind of take
And
those losses faster. Yeah.
remember, we used to talk about Stottlemyre back in the 90s, used to say, look, the goal here is a small, steady, positive cash flow.
Mhm.
And
Your
and
longevity, I feel like in the game, not to say you haven't had really big trades in the past or anything like that, but I feel like your longevity and the incredible career and life that you've built is a testament to that. You always say, slow progress is slow change is permanent change, right? That's
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
line.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, or yeah, well, how do we say it? We say slow change is more permanent than quick change.
Mm-hmm.
In
Right.
other words, or you could fade a quick move in the market, but you can't fade a slow move in the market, right? I think that was all this. That's kind of the nice way to say what a boiling frog is, right? You put the frog into the pot. Everybody knows
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And so just, it's such as when we say the price behavior of a particular asset class is its best marketing tool for more money to be allocated to it, is essentially saying, why'd you buy them? Well, the price was going up, right? And so, but I mean, here in this case, you could say, yes, slow change is more permanent than fast change.
Well, this is really fun for me to have you on here and discuss this because we put like a lot of time and effort into thinking about this behind the
Right.
scenes. So I can kind of explain some of our logic. But this mentality that you're articulating of you're describing the long game, like viewing your trading career as a career, as something you're going to put many years into,
Right.
rather than like overnight success. That really is where people who are entering stage two, like that's a realization that we feel like that's what they've started to say. It's like, okay, I'm actually going to put in the work and I'm going to treat this as with respect and something that deserves a lot of time and attention. Whereas basically everyone in stage one, and this is very common for people when they start out, are like, maybe I'm just going to get rich fast and maybe this will be easy. Right.
And people have gotten rich fast.
That's the problem. Some very,
Right.
very rarely, some people do, and they post on, whatever, Twitter or
I've
TikTok.
seen it. I've seen Marshall Aronow walked onto the floor of the exchange and made 100 grand in the first month, 10,000 in his like first 3 days, and he just stood right in front of me. And he went on to become a big crude trader, but I couldn't believe it. He was fearless, and he traded like he'd been doing it his whole life.
Was he just like a natural Was he
Yep.
a natural at it or
Yep.
what?
Yep.
Okay, so it wasn't really luck. He just was born with that, like,
I
or came
couldn't.
up in a family where they talked about it all the time or
Mhm.
something.
Right. Like you see that, obviously the level in sports has come up a bunch, and there are people in trading that can happen. And it's a beautiful thing to see. But for the
Yeah.
most of us, right, like we have to, it's almost like you have to first recognize the mistakes that you're making, and then in my case I would just write them down on my trading cards, like, don't do this.
Mm,
And then there's no one to congratulate you when you don't do something.
right.
Right. And then you're just kind of like, oh cool, I had the opportunity to where I would normally make that mistake and I didn't do it. And that was a significant turning point in my early career, was recognizing you need to recognize where you're making the same mistakes over and over. And
Yeah.
that and then of course, you know it's a lone I'm sure you've said it many times, it's a lonely path to figuring yourself out. And
Hmm.
and then it's just like, oh, if you recognize that you can change your own behavior for the better,
Hmm.
then you become motivated, because then you start to really become a student of yourself. Because the markets, it's an inanimate thing. Remember, we're talking like the ski slope doesn't care
Hmm.
about, or the ocean doesn't particularly care about you on it, but it's our job to work with it, compete against it, however you wish to frame it. And so um, that relationship becomes, you become watching yourself, and then to the point of like, okay, well, now I've got a good handle on myself, and I understand the basics of technicals, what works, doesn't work, macro fundamentals, psychology, however. And then you actually have to interplay how the situation is presenting itself.
Mm. What do you mean by that? Yeah.
Well, like, okay, you know how to execute a trade, you know how to get in and out, you know all about your options, Greeks, technicals, like we're saying, all the free tools, and what works and what doesn't work. But yet the situation that the market's presenting, the confluence of indicators, the background, the news flow, things like that, is a whole nother animal, as though
Hmm.
you either play the $5 table, a $50 table, a $500 table, depending on A, did you get enough sleep, how are you feeling, what's the setup like, all your skills. But then in the sense, you also have to integrate, what is it in surfing terms, what does the wave look like today? Is it small? Is it big? Is it moving fast? Is it moving slow? Is there wind? Is it glassy? Same with
Hmm.
we pull up to the back bowls in Vail, and you and I, you grew up there. Look, we both know that it's not too steep, but we also know that it can be wind affected. We
Hmm.
do know, right, that there could be rocks and things that we don't know how deep the base is, or particular sun exposures could be hard and things like that. In other words, there's an aspect. The market is an aspect that you need to be in. You need to be aware in respect of how the situation outside of you is presenting itself. That's all.
Hmm. That's so beautifully said. I mean, so I feel like you really quickly keyed into, okay, in the first like 1 to 2 stages, it's about like tactical skill acquisition, right? Like, okay, options, Greeks, stuff like that. And then
Right.
it's also understanding just how does the market work? Like, how does this thing function? How do prices move and things like that? Then you really flag like, okay, psychology starts to come into that, as you beautifully said, become a student of yourself. I feel like we've been working together, teaching together for like 8 years, and you just
Yeah.
dropped that line on me. Where's that been for that for that long? But that's a beautiful way to frame it, to become a student of yourself. And then now you're saying, as you move out of that, which I feel like we're starting to get out of stage, I'll pull the graphic up, but out of stage 3, maybe in a little stage 4, like reading the market environment, you're saying is like kind of the next
Yeah,
step
to
from
like,
there. Yeah.
let's review step one. First is the challenge, right? It's a challenge. You step into the ring, you step in front of your screen. It's a challenge. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of cool. Then they know that they're challenging both your mental fortitude, your ability to discern proper entries and exits, your ability to admit you're wrong, right? The people who can't admit they're wrong get done very quickly, right? The
Mm-hmm.
people who disrespect the risk, right, and average frequently, those are the people who blow out. I'm sure a lot of those apex guys get toasted doing that in
Mm-hmm.
the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then curiosity, right? Like, what are the character traits that get us up in the morning when we're a new trader? It's got to be curiosity. It's got to be the challenge. It's got to be some degree of excitement, some degree of, right? Because nobody goes to work and rolls the dice every day the way a new trader does, right? You're just like, wow. And and then of course nobody understands that, so it's somewhat lonely. But just so we're touching on that first part, right? There's part curiosity, part challenge, part I can do it, part I'm going to try and do it, part Q, how does this work out in the end, right? What they tell people who are going to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge before they do. Um, they tell what do they say? They say, "Don't you want to see how it works out?" I mean, there's a lot of that in the beginning of trading, and
Mm-hmm.
then the other. You probably have so many naysayers when you're starting. My mom was like, "You should get a job as a plumber," and I was like, you know,
So I still
she
I still
did.
love that story.
Right. You should get a real skill, she said, was as a plumber. And what was great was that she was a shrink and a politician. And she eventually ended up working with a lot of hedge funds in Westport in Connecticut. And so after
Because you
that,
said, did you set her up with that client base or what?
no, no,
No?
no. I mean, all the hedge fund guys moved to Westport, and Greenwich and things like that. And of course, their relationships. I'm sure she was there for their relationships with their family or their wives or stuff like that. But she
Right.
didn't, as you probably know, parent or patient client privilege. Okay, so that's the beginning of, it's I can do it, or I can prove it, or I think I can do it. And it's, there's the old, you want to be like the Marlboro Man, or the image, right, of the self. This is the glory aspect of the beginning. And then
Mm.
as you say, as you start to learn in the second stage, where you're starting to actually take it as a career choice,
Hmm.
and then you have to start to realize, holy cow, right? Like, I need to stay in business.
I kind of feel, I mean, I don't know if you disagree with this, but I feel like stage two, aptly named the grind. I feel like this is the hardest part. This is kind of the graveyard for most. So many traders don't make it through this because there's so little hope, right? Like you're just kind of getting your ass kicked day in, day out, and you're like, what the
I
fuck
mean,
am I doing?
yeah,
Like,
and it's happened, and it's normal. And what's really helpful is if you have someone who really wants you to stay there, and you call them on the days. In my
mm,
case, it was my dad. I called him and I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. It's impossible.
how far
And
in were you started when you were 19? I mean, were you still having those calls at like 22 or
30,
something? Or
no,
30?
30. At 30, he was
You had
just
had
like,
like those must have been moments of
yeah.
doubt. I mean, you had had pretty big success like
Oh
earlier
yeah,
in your career,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah. I mean, Victor bought me a 911, the in silver, beautiful
right,
Porsche. Went
right. So
on,
you were doing
right.
fine before that.
Right. I had a
But your
house on the
point still
beach.
stands. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Your point still stands.
Yeah,
You need
I
someone
was.
in your corner, right?
You definitely curate and make sure you take good care to inform that person when you have a good day. But in my
Mm,
case, I remember I was standing right outside the ring and I was just like, I can't do this. And my dad said to me, do me a favor. He goes, I don't ask you for many favors, but just go stand in the pit, go stand in the ring, and,
wow.
just and stay there and just do it for me.
Wow. What
And
what do you remember what happened when you were like, I can't do it? Was it just a day with a bad loss, or was it a string of bad losses, or what was
like it was, yeah, it was probably similar to the way it is now, right? It's very difficult and markets move very quickly and there's no order. And yeah, as we all know, the game is always changing. And
mm,
so, if you're not aware of the fact that what's working today is probably not going to work tomorrow, um, those transitions are super difficult. Taleb writes about that in Fooled by Randomness a
mm,
lot. And I'm sure you see that in people, right, who are, successful in one phase. And then obviously the
absolutely.
market, yeah, I mean, that happens to all of us because we're so creatures of habit, or we want something to work, and then all of a sudden it works. It's kind of really disruptive when you start to recognize that everything you do has a shelf life in regards
Mm-hmm.
to your education here. And
Mm-hmm.
and then it's a question of, okay, is it an arms race, or is it a decision to first understand my ability to be flexible before I know which way to even pursue the markets? And so,
Like
um,
is the core sort of skill set, building resilience, building in self adaptability and non-attachment, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's so strange. It's like you could actually not know anything about technical analysis and be fine if you were able to be in that beginner's mind of like, oh, I'm wrong, I gotta go.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
or just understand like, oh, you stumble across something that works and then you just keep doing it until it doesn't work. But then you have to go, then the path again, you know, seek out the next direction. I mean, I don't know how this helps people. I would say that if you are experiencing a troubled spot, maybe look more interior rather than exterior.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
Not that you can't do
Depend
both.
depending, I mean, and one of the reasons why we created this is to help people kind of place themselves somewhere on the journey so that they can have a better sense of like, okay, where should I be focusing right now? What are the things that I should be looking at? Um,
One thing,
and
one thing
yeah.
that helps as time goes by is that you experience less self-doubt.
Mm, say more. Just you just get enough wins
Yeah,
under your belt where you're like,
yeah, you get enough wins under your belt that if you are caught in a bad run of 3 days of losing or a week, God forbid, a week of losing or something like that, you know that you have the ability to get out of losers quickly. You know that you have the ability to still have the ego strength to hit the mouse and say, I think, but for some way, somehow, the market or the environment or the person or the whatever who's running everything and behind the scenes of Wizard of Oz has changed the game,
mm,
then you you don't experience crushing self-doubt. You just have an understanding that things are different and you need to approach it in a different manner. And
mm,
so there's it's not like an arrogance. It's just like you, as you said, you have enough wins under your belt. So I would suggest to people that the emotional the emotional volatility that arises when you're first into the game, the first 10 years, is much greater than the emotional volatility as time goes by. And I wonder,
mm.
do you see that just in your practice of are older people are older people more chill?
Huh.
I don't know. Is it just a
Say
function of age? Is it just, or is it a function of,
I definitely think as people get older, they get a sense of like, I saw this meme the other day that said something to the effect of, I thought as I got older that I would have all the answers, but then I realized that I just care a lot less. And
right?
like you kind of realize the things as you get older. You're like, I'm not going to get hung up on this, on this, on this. And yeah, certainly as you get older, you have more life experience, and you're like, okay, I actually know a thing about a thing or two. As you said very well at the beginning of this, you learn how to not repeat certain mistakes, over and over,
Huge.
right?
Right, huge, and no one ever pats you on the back, as I say. So, but that to me was one of the biggest turning points. Another big turning point when I was very new at the game was recognizing that I didn't know.
Hmm.
Um, in a positive sense, as though, right, like you wake up and you're in the middle of the night. I literally sat bolt upright in bed and I said, I know that I don't know, and so that helps to be able to admit you're wrong,
Just
and
have
also,
humility in the face
yeah,
of, yeah,
or curiosity, right?
curiosity. Yeah.
Remember, and then
Yeah.
as we say, right, what dovetails into curiosity becomes courage, but that takes a minute to get there. And so, all
You,
right, go ahead.
well, you've nailed a couple. I mean, we put some of these like little sample milestones on here just to call out,
Oh
this is
yeah,
some things that people experience, but you named one that's really beautiful that we should put on here, which is like having to reinvent yourself in the face of a new market regime, market environment,
yep,
right? Like every trader
yep.
that's been around for long enough, like realizes that they have to make that change. So I want to ask you about like you, a lot of traders talk so much about like, dude, I bought these options at 15 cents. I'm an idiot. I got out at whatever, 37 cents and the thing went to $20.
When
And
yeah,
like,
$20 million.
and I don't really have a memory of you doing that much. Do you feel like you've like made peace with moves that you like missed? Do you even think about it like that you've quote missed moves? Or do you just
Kelly.
keep those criticisms completely to yourself in the darkness at night?
No. Kelly Morris was a famous yoga teacher in New York and was my girlfriend for 3 years. And I came home one day. Her dad was a partner at JP Morgan. He ran Asia, so she grew up in Japan. And but anyway, I would come home and I'd say, I'm such a pussy, right? I got out of this winning trade. And of course, Kelly was a very sophisticated, grew up around finance, all that. She just looked at me and kind of disdainfully said, the reason you are still in business is that you are a pussy.
So awesome. So great.
So, um, so yeah, for anybody right, and that's a yoga. She's a yoga teacher, right? So,
Mhm.
um, that's pretty good advice, right? Like you did the best you could. For anybody who's suffering with that, I would say you did the best you could at the time. Stottlemyre would say the reason we get out of a trade is we find a better opportunity. That's a valid reason. Another one is Stottlemyre would say would be you read the situation. I'm trying to remember. He said you read the situation as it unfolds when you're in the trade, and you're doing
Mhm.
the best you can. Lucci does this very well. He reads a situation within the situation with the position on,
Mhm.
with a neutral mindset. He would say something like along the lines of, "Hey, maybe there's more to this trade than I thought."
Mhm. Mhm. Which is part of why he's so good at
Yep.
flipping direction, right?
Yeah, and so those are all sort of those are all sort of things that you pick up along the way. We were fortunate in the day to have the exchange, but now, I mean, all that we have is the steam room. And
You're talking
so,
about from a community standpoint in terms of having
yes,
camaraderie and learning from other people, right?
or
Yeah,
yeah,
it's so much
mentors.
harder. I'd be very curious to hear what you think about like when it was harder to come up as a trader, but now I feel like the
I
sense of
lost you.
isolation, that one element.
Okay, say again. I lost you on that.
Oh, I was going to say, I'd be curious to hear what you think, like how this journey was different at different times of, in the 80s and 90s, whatever. I feel like right now, the isolation, that element of it is the hardest
Is really
because,
brutal. Like in
yeah.
fact, the ring in '87 and many times the ring, whenever there's a crisis, the ring would actually look all around if the market was crashing, and then we'd get to a spot where everybody would say, "Okay, ready." Literally, the ring would look at everybody and then say, "Okay, now, buy them now." Like
Whoa.
yeah, like the idea is that people, they always say that if you're in a crowd and there's an emergency, you're supposed to take charge and order people within the innocent bystanders around to help this person do that, do this, do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the consequences of internet trading or virtual trading that we're doing now is that you don't see successful people putting the trade on in real time. You don't
Mm.
see the big orders coming in per se. That broker represents Goldman here. That guy's JP Morgan, and they're buying them now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
the strength and the courage does come from community, and that
Mm.
was definitely demonstrated in the ring. How does it help now? It helps that you have either good friends that you trust on your phone or Steam Room,
Mm-hmm.
and because it doesn't necessarily exist on Twitter. Twitter's great for news and sort of longer term opinions, but for the shorter term aspect of stuff, you need the people that you trust, and that I think that's the value of the Steam Room, then the community, because it's not from an information perspective, but it's more almost like an emotional courage and seeing successful people, right? Successful social behavior is contagious.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, what you're saying is so important, and I'm realizing like to give another example or to give an analogy to a different thing, I was really, really fortunate at an relatively early time in my life to be able to watch Andre Agassi practice once before he retired. It was the last year of his career. And I got to see him practice, and there was nobody around. I was like 8 feet away from him. And he hit 100, I swear, 100 backhands in a row, perfect balls. I didn't know a human being could hit a ball like that just once, that perfectly. He hit 100 in a row without missing, and then he missed one, and then he just did it again over and over again. And it's almost like I could feel my brain expanding to be like, this is what people are capable of. Like this is the bar now. This is what is possible. Obviously, I'm not even within sniffing distance of him as a tennis player, but it all of a sudden gave me a model. It gave me almost like a map of the terrain of like, oh, this is actually how far you can go. And that's a little bit about, I feel like, what you're saying. If you, when you were in the pit or, on the floor, you could see people doing things in a certain way at a certain level. You were physically in proximity to them and you were like, this is possible. Now people are, you know, in a vacuum on
Isolated.
their own,
Yeah.
isolated. They don't
Yeah.
have that in the same way. Yeah.
And so there is that lack of like we're saying, successful social behavior is contagious. When someone who's good starts buying and you're like, there's something to notice right there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, to your point, I was at the US Open sitting in the grandstand and on the right on the net in the front row. And I watched Lendl, I forget who he was playing, but he had a clean down the line winner, but it hit the net cord right in front of me and then dropped down. And he,
Mm.
they have ball people, but he walked up to pick up the ball, held up the ball, looked at me, and he goes, "Make the shot." Walked away.
I love it.
And I love that. And so, to our point, whereas you can get everything, that's another story. Stottlemyre put a guy in the bond pit that he thought could make it. And the guy used a point and figure chart back in the old day, and it stood there for like 2 months. And then finally, Pete got frustrated with him, and he walked into the ring and he goes, he had made a trade, and the guy Pete walked up to him and said, what's the market? He goes 13 bid at 14. And Pete just said, sold you 50 and walked out. So the guy actually had to trade, right? Like make the shot.
He pushed him off the edge.
Yes.
Pushed him into the pool off the diving board. Yeah.
Yes. And
yeah.
so, I mean, those were common stories in the old days where people used to come and stand in the bottom of the ring and just chart and sim trade all the time. And at a certain point in the beginning, as we were saying in the beginning of that chart, there is the element that you really do have to get in there, get your hands dirty. And remember, too, we've always talked about how messy it is. So people who are perfectionists are not going to be able to do this job. We have to do as what Gottman says is a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And be happy with that, right? Like you were saying about, when I said what Kelly was like, the reason you're still in business is that you're such a pussy. Like the idea is that we're doing the best we can under the situation. It's messy. And
that touches on this thing right here, realization of an unequal playing field. I think you have you've beautifully said in the past, like, I mean, you talk about in the psychology course, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but you've just said, hey, we don't know everything, right? And there's like the information asymmetry is very real. So sometimes you lose a trade because it's not even playing field. So let yourself off the hook, right? Is that bastardizing your wisdom?
No, not at all. It's the understanding is that we're in part of this enormous system and we can't see everything. We can't even see things that are affecting the price real time. We don't know. And we can only see maybe what's 10 feet around the corner. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to understand that you're participating in this giant system with people who have the ability to move prices as well as news events, people front running it, countries trading for their own accounts, controlling news flow. You need to be able to understand that they are not your friends. And so for years we were sold the idea that it's a level playing field. Like, though you have this is that you will always get a fair shot on the exchange. Unfortunately, that's not really accurate. But that's the legend. And so, the realization allows you, I think, the ability to let your ego off the hook. And I think that's important for people to realize that, a lot of times you want to be right. Mm-hmm. And so exiting quickly is being right. And so, and I generally regret exiting quickly rather than sliding my stops. We've all done it, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that transition there again is dangerous. It's like averaging is very dangerous. Like it's sliding your stops, thinking that you're gonna be right. You're just early, when in fact enough time goes by that you qualify as wrong. And my point is that these are, again, looking inside and seeing that you can get out and be wrong without it really affecting the course of your day, other than you are wrong for that thing and it may have had nothing to do with anything that was part of the setup. But, it's part of the journey. And the journey, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how far into your career do you think it was till you realize like that it was a really psychological endeavor. The importance of psychology. Was it right off the jump or?
No, it was not. It was like first you had to learn everything technical, and
Right.
that was in those days. It was just pencil, point and figure charts, and occasionally bar charts written by hand on graph paper. Um, but then it became completely obvious. For example, Howie Cohen used to say it's like a bad marriage. You have to go deal with this thing that you don't necessarily like, and it's you don't know the mood of the market of every day, but yet you're dealing with it again today. And other people would say things like, I'd be like, why are you stopping at 3 o'clock? And people would say, you only have so much good karma. You
Mm,
can't push your luck. And then
mm,
there were people would always tend to, I remember very early in the beginning, it was like people would tend to act out. You'd see it in the pit. People would act out their psychological problems when they were under stress, whether they'd
oh,
snap, things like that. And I'm sure you see that in your practice, right? And I'm sure we still see it in ourselves, is where we're
mm-hmm,
short with people when we're under stress and things like that. Or,
mm-hmm,
it happens in cars, and it happens certainly,
mm-hmm.
you see someone's foot get stepped on the subway, and you're like, oh, that's too bad. And then the person steps on your foot, you're like, asshole. So that you,
Well, we got this one. We have this here, and this is all credit to Marsh, who's done an interview here. He said
yeah,
this. You see the market as a mirror. Like that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Like all of a
yeah,
sudden, the market, you start
right.
projecting all of your own stuff. You got in a fight with your spouse the night before. You
Your
come in,
mother, in my case, right? And my mom, I was so young, I'd fight with my mom. I'd come in, I'd fight with the market.
yeah, and all of a sudden yeah,
Right. And so recognize if you have a propensity to stir trouble, recognize that will manifest itself in trading. A lot of
mm,
times, for people who are listening, a lot of times if you're trying to get past a bad unconscious behavior, making sure that you have patience and taking a deep breath rather than executing, or write yourself a post-it note that says, don't be so quick to hit the mouse, and then see how the situation unfolds.
mm.
Because a lot of times if you're in a hurry to do something, I would suggest it might be driven by an unconscious pattern. Be conscious of the emotional urges,
Be conscious of the emotional urges. That's the
right?
name of the
Versus
game, right?
being methodical, like, hey, whatever tool you have, it better work, and so stick to those tools. and
Mm-hmm.
then and then make sure you have a reason, right? Because they're going to try and make you cover, or whatever. They're going to try and run your stop to wherever you have your tool for whatever reason. And so if you have a reason, you have more staying power.
Mm-hmm.
And there's less emotional damage because you had a reason. And if you got stopped out, that's okay. It happens. Back on the horse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Death and rebirth, right? In every religion, right? The rebirth element is a part that we want to go to. So in your trader's journey, make sure that you include the ability for rebirth, whether
Yeah,
that
that's
means,
it.
right?
That's a big one. I'm glad we're having this conversation. I feel like so much of what you're identifying is, people who are in that kind of stage 2, stage 3, really where they should be looking. If guys, if you're a trader out here listening to this and you're like, yeah, I feel like that's where I'm at stage 2 or stage 3, kind of the edge there is more tactical, skill acquisition and understanding of how, the market works. Community is important through all of this, right? Obviously, we think the Steam Room is one of the best communities in the world. We're heavily biased, but find a community of good people regardless. It's going to help you throughout this entire journey. Stage 2, stage 3, in terms of our courses, we're doing this sales offer, this discount offer for the courses, the complete flow trader, precision options trader. Those are really about skill acquisition as you get into, and tape reading, of course, Lucci's tape reading course,
Yep,
as you
yep.
start getting into later stage 3, stage 4, that's more trading psychology. That's, Chris's wonderful course, master
Which
course includes
which
all this stuff.
which Charlie and I taught, and Charlie wrote the progression. And with all due respect,
I didn't
a
really
lot
teach shit, Chris. I just ask Chris questions and then he talks. Is basically what I do, guys.
we
Let's be
took a
honest.
remember we took a lot of heat because no one had ever taught it. in the very beginning. And most
Yeah,
people
there's a lot of people in New York who were like mad at us. They were like, "How dare you try and teach?"
teach us trading psychology as
And
though,
we were like, "Oh yeah, just watch us."
and so, um, which is kind of nice, right? And I think a lot of Misfits too, where we were trying to pass along some of the sort of hard lessons learned in the community, um,
Yeah,
and that,
there's nobody better suited to teach training psychology than you. All down that hill. So, um,
or nobody willing to step out in front of the camera, and
you gotta have some risk. You gotta have a risk tolerance in that way too.
right. Yeah, yeah. So in the beginning, right? In the beginning, what do people need to know? They need to be curious. They need to be excited. They need to know that they should ask if they have. When you start on the trading journey, remember there are no dumb questions. You just can't ask the same question twice.
Mm,
Okay.
such
There
a
was
good rule. Yep.
right. So you can find people, ask them the questions, and then remember there's an age-old, I did not make this up, but they said there's no crying in commodities, right? We have a stiff upper lip. We assume we're accountable for our decisions. And so we live and die by that. And there's sure I made a mistake. That's part of it. Okay. 8 out of 10 people lose everything. And then you start to find people that you trust, and then you can ask them questions. And if you catch them in the right time, they will help you. There are some people who teach those, the community that you have there is really good and really solid. And people, I love how sticky your community is too. People stay.
Yeah.
And then
Not nearly as big as a lot of the other ones out there, but yeah, people stay with us, man.
yeah, that's very cool. And then as you start to get better at trading, you can size down your risk. In the very beginning, when you start to get slowly profitable, you can curate your entries and size down your risk, and then your hit rate becomes better. You make many more winners than you do losers, and then your friends will start to press you to size up, and that's a really hard transition. and
Mm.
and then the reversals that reversing, such as Lucci does, those are skills that some people that I'm still trying to learn to reverse. And
Mm.
so and along the lines of, as we've always said, instead of learning to hit curveballs, if you're a fastball hitter, right, just crush fastballs, right?
Yeah, I was wondering about sort of self acceptance, where you feel like that would fall on this. Like,
Yeah,
there's something to be said about always trying to get better, but at a certain point, you also just say, "Hey, this is who I am," right? And so I'm not going to go after
you know,
certain types of trades, right?
yeah. Or if you're trying to go surfing and there's only 1 foot waves, like that's the most I can get, right?
Right,
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 like we get to Vail and it sucks. Well, okay, fine. We'll do what we can with
right.
with the
Go see some
situation,
moguls and do some
right?
upright. Yeah.
And so knowing that, right, so that you don't have your expectations are in line, right? And essentially, that's essentially what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep our expectations in line, with our aptitude.
Mm. Keep our expectations in line with our aptitude. That is like the summary of kind of why we did this thing. And to go back again to tennis, because that's so much. I'm really in this because we in the tennis mentality, because I just watched this French Open final on
Yeah,
Sunday between.
people say it was unbelievable. Was it unbelievable?
I mean, I was up at, I watched all 5.5 hours of it. It was an absolute pleasure to watch. It was, Sinner versus Alcaraz. It's going to go down as one of the top five. Maybe some people are calling it the best match of all time. But
Right.
the reason I bring it up is because, you could watch something like that. You could be like, oh, so when someone, hits 110-mile-an-hour forehand behind me, I should just reverse directions and then run and hit a perfect forehand, down the line. And it's like, these guys are 50 levels beyond where the average person is. So, as you just said, it's so important to take the next step in your process, in your journey, dependent on where you are at. I think that's one of the things that's so toxic about social media and stuff like that, is you're just bombarded with people who are in completely different stages, different parts of the process. And you're like, oh, well, this guy is doing XYZ. I should just go try that. Like, that probably has nothing to do with you and where you're at.
Mm-hmm. So again, you match your expectations of how the market is presenting itself to us, and then with your aptitude, how are you feeling? How smart are you about it? And then think about other perspectives. Look, we always talk about, you know, if I'm looking for a top, well, what's the flaw in the bull's argument here? right? You need to think in terms of who your competitors are, who your opposition is. And with that sense of humility, if you think you have a fair shot in that case, then execute the trade. But it's not you against the market. You and the market have to work in concert
Hmm.
together, right? You have to understand where you fit. If you were to do something, would somebody else do the same thing after you? Because that's what you're going to need to get profit on the trade, right? Like,
Whoa. I've never heard you say that exactly like that before. If
right,
you're going to do something, would somebody else do the same thing right after you? Because, yeah, yeah, that makes total
right.
sense as you say that. Yeah.
And so thinking in those terms, like, well, if for example, today was another up day, and if you wanted to sell them, but then who would knock the price down? You need somebody else behind you to sell them at a lower price. And the market's advertising itself as going higher in this case. So any selling would be random. So just understanding the mechanics in that regard of the psychology of what would make this trade work. I'd have to be early, and then the market would have to stop. You'd have to have a lack of buying, and then you'd need someone to actually sell them at a lower price so that I could make a profit. So it's not you against the market, it's you dealing in context of how price is affecting other people's psychology in regards to whether they think that the market will continue to go up or in fact that the market is now overpriced and would trade lower. And that's further down the journey of understanding how do I fit in here and
Mm.
and
Yeah, that should be on there, man. What you're, God. Hey, Chris, you're really smart with this stuff. Yeah, the idea, I think a lot of newer traders get caught up in the story of it's me versus the market. I'm going to crusade into
yeah,
battle. Whereas
right,
more advanced traders
right,
are like, you articulating what they live as what you're articulating. How can I ride waves that the market is giving me? How can I work with this
right,
absolutely inconceivably powerful force?
right.
You know?
If you're doing something that you perceive as low probability, in fact, it is low probability. So
Mhm.
you need to integrate the probabilities of other people seeing what you're seeing, and and then just being slightly ahead of them. So it's if in an up move, if you're going to try and pick a top, what would cause someone else to actually sell when in fact they're long and the prices are going up? So again, to what we're saying, right? Trying to understand what would make other people do something and then do it right before them.
Well, I think this is a good place to wind it down because just like like every one of your sentences that you drop is enough for most people to chew on for 24 hours. I don't want to like melt too many brains out there, but um,
Well, let's
I
leave
hope
them
everybody
with
who's
you.
watching, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you can do this, right? You can do this, and I do think trading is one of the most life affirming things you can do. Whereas you're taking a chance, you're risking, you're saying I think against long odds, and that you're remaining to every time you hit the mouse, it's I think, it's ego, it's an affirmation of you're here, and
Mm,
then every time that you're getting out of a trade, you're like, okay, they're this is what they're giving me, I'll take it and be happy with it. And then, so it's this life affirming process. And then when you cover the trade, it's almost as though that's just what I got today, right? I am not in control of the situation. I'm just participating in this fluid exchange of money, ideas, concepts, hopes, dreams, expectations. The whole game is wrapped into the price. And so allowing yourself, how do you fit in that game is more of like a bunch of cogs moving, and where do you fit in that cog, not you against the market. But you can do it. I think, again, I want to say that it's the most life affirming thing you can do, I think, is trading.
that's it. Thanks for doing this, Chris. Super
Anytime.
helpful. Yeah,
Love you
man.
guys. And yeah,
Yeah.
steam room, anybody who wants to should go to the steam room. It's great. Those guys are smart.
Thanks, man. We're honored to have you be part of everything we do. So super appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, take care of yourself, and Yeah, and stay close, and I'll see you online.
Sounds good. All
Okay,
right. See you, Chris.
bye.